The canvas tent flapped violently in the Wyoming wind as Rosalie Miller tried to steady the makeshift desk, where 8-year-old Tommy Anderson struggled to form his letters on a worn slate. It was September 1878, and Fort Laramie had grown faster than anyone had anticipated, bringing families who needed their children educated but no proper building to house them. The army post had expanded into a bustling town, and Rosalie, fresh from teaching college in Boston at 23 years old, had answered the advertisement for a schoolteacher with romantic notions of frontier adventure. She had not expected to be teaching in a tent that threatened to blow away with every gust of prairie wind. "Miss Miller, I cannot see my slate properly," complained little Sarah Jenkins, squinting in the dim light that filtered through the dingy canvas. "The sun keeps moving and now it is all shadow." Rosalie sighed and repositioned the girl's bench closer to the tent opening, where golden September light streamed in. The arrangement was far from ideal, but it was all Fort Laramie could provide. The town had spent its limited funds on a new saloon and a general store, and the schoolhouse remained an unfulfilled promise. She had arrived 3 weeks ago to find the school board apologetic but empty-handed. "Teach in the tent until spring," they said. "We will have something built by then," they promised. She did not believe them. "Children, let us practice our arithmetic," Rosalie announced, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. The wind had pulled it loose from her sensible bun hours ago. "If a farmer has 12 chickens and sells 4 at the market, how many does he have remaining?" The tent flap opened suddenly, and Rosalie turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. The man removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a startling blue-green, the color of shallow creek water, and they surveyed the tent with obvious disapproval. "Madam, I apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice a low drawl that marked him as someone who had spent considerable time in the saddle under open skies. "I am Jackson Yates. I work at the Double R Ranch just north of town. My boss, Mr. Richardson, he has a daughter who should be in school, but he heard the accommodations were not suitable." Rosalie straightened her shoulders, feeling defensive despite knowing he was absolutely right. "The accommodations are temporary, Mr. Yates. The children are learning perfectly well, I assure you." Jackson's gaze traveled from the sagging canvas roof to the dirt floor where the children sat on rough benches, to the corner where rain from yesterday's storm had created a muddy puddle that had yet to dry. His jaw tightened. "No disrespect intended, Miss Miller, but this is no place for children, let alone a lady like yourself." His eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. "How long have they expected you to teach like this?" "Since I arrived," Rosalie admitted, then added quickly, "but I manage quite well. The children are resilient and we make do with what we have. Making do is not the same as having what you need." Jackson turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I will speak to Mr. Richardson. Perhaps something can be done." He left before Rosalie could respond, ducking through the tent flap and disappearing into the bright afternoon. She stood staring after him, unsettled by the encounter in ways she could not immediately name. The children had fallen silent, watching her with curious eyes. "Is that man going to build us a real school, Miss Miller?" Tommy asked hopefully. "I do not know, Tommy. Now back to our arithmetic." But Rosalie found herself distracted for the rest of the afternoon, her thoughts returning to the tall cowboy with the intense eyes and the quiet conviction in his voice. She had grown accustomed to the broken promises of the school board, to the apologetic shrugs of town officials who had more pressing concerns. Jackson Yates had looked at her tent classroom with anger, as though the situation personally offended him, and that reaction stirred something in her chest she had not felt in a long while. Hope. That evening, Rosalie walked to the boarding house where she rented a small room from Mrs. Peterson, a widow who had come west with her late husband during the gold rush years. The older woman was kneading bread dough when Rosalie entered the kitchen, her flour-dusted hands working the mass with practiced efficiency. "You look thoughtful, dear," Mrs. Peterson observed. "Trouble with the children?" "No, the children are wonderful." Rosalie poured herself a cup of water from the pitcher on the table. "A man came by today, Jackson Yates. Do you know him?" Mrs. Peterson's weathered face broke into a smile. "Everyone knows Jackson. He has worked at the Double R for 5 years now, came up from Texas after his parents died of fever. He is a good man, honest and hardworking. Keeps to himself mostly, but he will help anyone who needs it. Why do you ask?" He seemed disturbed by the tent. "Said he might speak to his employer about it." "If Jackson said he would do something, he will do it," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "That boy does not make promises he cannot keep. His word is as solid as bedrock." Rosalie felt that flutter of hope again and tried to suppress it. She had learned not to expect too much from this rough frontier town, where survival took precedence over education and culture. But something about Jackson's quiet intensity made her want to believe. 3 days passed with no word from Jackson Yates or anyone else about the school situation. Rosalie taught her students through a fierce windstorm that nearly collapsed the tent, then through a cold snap that left the children shivering on their benches. She requisitioned a small stove from the army surplus, but it barely heated the drafty space. By Friday afternoon, she had resigned herself to another broken promise. Then, Jackson appeared at the tent entrance again, this time accompanied by a silver-haired man in an expensive suit that looked out of place on the dusty Wyoming plains. "Miss Miller," Jackson said, "this is Walter Richardson, owner of the Double R Ranch. He would like to speak with you." Walter Richardson stepped forward and extended his hand. "Miss Miller, Jackson here has told me about your situation. I have a daughter, Emma, who is 9 years old. I had intended to send her to school in Cheyenne, but my late wife made me promise our children would be educated here, among their own community." When Jackson described these conditions, I knew I could not in good conscience send Emma to study in a tent. "I understand," Rosalie said quietly, her heart sinking. So this was simply another parent withdrawing their child, another reminder of her failure to provide adequate schooling. "No, I do not think you do," Walter continued, a smile creasing his lined face. "I am prepared to fund the construction of a proper schoolhouse. Not next spring, not someday, but now. I own a timber operation in the mountains, and I can provide the lumber at cost. What I need is someone to oversee the construction, someone I can trust to build something solid and lasting." Rosalie's breath caught. "Mr. Richardson, that is extraordinarily generous, but surely the town should pay for its own school." "The town has had its chance," Walter said bluntly. "Jackson tells me you have been teaching in this tent for nearly a month, and the school board has done nothing but make empty promises. My Emma deserves better. All these children deserve better. You deserve better, Miss Miller." Jackson had been standing quietly during this exchange, but now he spoke. "If you approve the plan, Miss Miller, I have volunteered to oversee the construction. Mr. Richardson has given me leave from my regular ranch duties. I have some experience with carpentry, and I can hire men to help with the work." Rosalie looked between the two men, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do this? Build an entire schoolhouse?" "We would," Walter confirmed. "I will cover the costs. Jackson will provide the labor and supervision. All we need is your approval on the location and design." "My approval?" Rosalie felt overwhelmed. "Surely that should come from the school board." Jackson's expression hardened. "The school board has not earned the right to make decisions about this school. You are the one teaching these children every day. You know what they need. Your opinion is the one that matters." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent warmth flooding through her. Rosalie had spent 3 weeks feeling alone and unsupported, battling the elements and inadequate supplies with nothing but her determination. Now these two men stood before her offering not just help, but respect for her judgment. "Then yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, please. The children need a proper school, and I will be grateful for anything you can provide." Walter shook her hand again. "Excellent. Jackson will consult with you on the details. We will begin construction as soon as possible." After Walter left, Jackson remained behind. The children had already been dismissed for the day, and the tent felt oddly intimate with just the two of them inside. Rosalie busied herself straightening the benches, suddenly self-conscious. "This is very kind of you, Mr. Yates," she said, "to take time away from your work to build a schoolhouse." "It is not kindness," Jackson replied. "It is necessity. What I saw here the other day made me angry. A woman like you, educated and refined, forced to work in conditions worse than my horse's stable. Children sitting in mud and cold because the men who should provide for them are too busy drinking and gambling at the saloon." He paused, then added more softly, "You deserve better." Rosalie turned to face him. "You said that before, but you do not know me, Mr. Yates." "How can you know what I deserve? I know you came all the way from Boston to teach children on the frontier. I know you have been here nearly a month in these terrible conditions and you have not quit. I know you care more about your students than your own comfort." His eyes held hers. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Miss Miller." She felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away first. "Well, I appreciate your confidence in me. When do you propose we begin?" "Tomorrow, if you are willing. We should walk the town and find a suitable location. Somewhere central with good drainage, away from the noise of the saloons." "Tomorrow is Saturday. Surely you have other obligations." Jackson smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Nothing more important than this." They agreed to meet at 9 in the morning, and Jackson left with a tip of his hat. Rosalie stood in the empty tent, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself it was simply excitement about finally getting a proper schoolhouse, but she knew that was not entirely honest. Jackson Yates had awakened something in her, some awareness she had not felt before. The way he looked at her, the conviction in his voice when he spoke about what she deserved, the quiet strength he projected simply by standing still. "This is foolish," she told herself firmly. "He is helping build a school, nothing more. Do not read romance into a simple act of community service." But that night, lying in her narrow boarding-house bed, Rosalie dreamed of blue-green eyes and calloused hands building something solid and permanent. And she woke with her heart full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. The Wyoming sky, that impossible shade of blue that seemed to exist nowhere else. Rosalie dressed carefully in her burgundy walking dress, telling herself it was simply because she wanted to make a good impression, not because she would be spending the morning with Jackson Yates. She arrived at the agreed meeting place, the town square such as it was, to find Jackson already waiting. He had clearly made an effort as well, his shirt clean and his hair neatly combed. The wind had already begun to disorder it. "Miss Miller," he greeted her, his eyes warming as they took her in. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you. I confess I am excited about this project. I barely slept for thinking of possibilities. They began walking through Fort Laramie, discussing locations. Jackson pointed out various plots of land, explaining the advantages and disadvantages of each. He was surprisingly knowledgeable about drainage, sun exposure, and wind patterns. As they walked, he told her about his background. "My father was a schoolteacher back in Texas," he said. Before the war, he believed education was the foundation of civilization, even on the frontier. Especially on the frontier, he used to say. "He taught me to read and write before I could properly ride a horse, though that changed soon enough." A shadow crossed his face. "The fever took both my parents within a week of each other. I was 18, just finished helping my father build a small school for our community. After they died, I could not stay in that town anymore. Everything reminded me of them." "I am so sorry," Rosalie said softly. "That must have been terribly difficult. It was 5 years ago. The grief has dulled, but I still think of them often." Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. "My father would have liked you. He always said teachers were the real heroes of the frontier, bringing light into the darkness." "That is a beautiful sentiment." He was right. "Look at what you do every day, Miss Miller. You could have stayed in Boston, taught in a proper school with a steady salary and civilized conditions. Instead, you came out here to this raw place to teach children who might never have learned to read otherwise. That takes courage." No one had ever spoken to Rosalie quite like this before. In Boston, her decision to go west had been viewed as slightly scandalous, a waste of her education. Her family had been appalled. Her mother had cried for days, certain Rosalie was throwing her life away. But Jackson looked at her as though she had done something heroic, and the admiration in his eyes made her feel seen in a way she never had before. "I wanted adventure," she admitted. "That probably sounds foolish." "It sounds honest." Jackson smiled. "How are you finding the adventure so far?" "More challenging than I anticipated, but also more rewarding. The children here are eager to learn in a way I never saw in Boston. They know education is a privilege, not a burden." She paused, then added, "And I have met some interesting people." "Have you?" There was a teasing note in his voice that made her smile. "The boarding house owner is quite a character. She has told me the most fascinating stories about the early days of Fort Laramie." "I meant people more recently encountered, but Mrs. Peterson is indeed a fine woman." Jackson's eyes danced with amusement. They were flirting, Rosalie realized with a start. She had not flirted with anyone in years, not since breaking her engagement to Thomas Whitmore, a Boston banker who had expected her to be content, planning dinner parties and bearing children. The realization that she was flirting with a cowboy in the middle of Wyoming should have shocked her, but instead it felt natural, easy, right. "What about this location?" Jackson asked, gesturing to a level plot of land at the edge of town, near a small creek. "Good drainage, protected from the worst winds by those cottonwoods and far enough from the saloons that the children would not be disturbed by noise." Rosalie surveyed the spot with a critical eye. It was perfect, exactly what she would have chosen herself. "I think it is ideal." "How large a building could Mr. Richardson afford?" "He said to build whatever you need. Within reason, of course, but Walter is a wealthy man. He can afford to be generous." "Then I would want a main classroom large enough for 30 students, with windows on the south and east walls for natural light. A smaller room for storage and perhaps eventually a library. A good stove with proper ventilation. Real desks instead of benches. A blackboard or perhaps several. And if we are dreaming, a small room where I could conduct private lessons or meet with parents." Jackson pulled out a small notebook and began sketching as she spoke. His hands were large and work roughened, but they moved over the paper with surprising grace. "Like this?" he asked, showing her a rough floor plan. Rosalie leaned closer to look and caught the scent of soap and leather and something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken. "Exactly like that. Mr. Yates, you have quite a talent for this. I told you, I helped my father build a school. I learned a few things." He added another window to his sketch. "We should start with the foundation next week. I have already spoken to some men about helping with the construction. If weather holds, we could have the basic structure up in a month, finished and ready for students in 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Rosalie could hardly believe it. "That seems impossibly fast. We will work quickly because the children need this now, not next spring, and because you should not spend another Wyoming winter teaching in a tent." The protective note had returned to his voice. "That would be unacceptable." They spent another hour at the site, with Jackson taking measurements and Rosalie offering suggestions. By the time they finished, the sun was high overhead and Rosalie's stomach was growling with hunger. Jackson heard it and grinned. "I apologize, Miss Miller. I have kept you working through lunch. Would you do me the honor of joining me at the hotel restaurant? They serve a decent meal, and we could continue discussing the schoolhouse plans." Rosalie knew she should decline. A single woman having lunch alone with a single man would cause talk in a small town like Fort Laramie. But she found she did not care what people said, and she was not ready for her time with Jackson to end. "I would be delighted," she said. The hotel restaurant was a simple affair, with rough-hewn tables and checkered cloths, but the food was better than expected. Jackson ordered pot roast for both of them, and as they ate, their conversation drifted from schoolhouse plans to more personal topics. Rosalie told him about growing up in Boston, the youngest of 5 daughters, always feeling slightly out of place in her family's refined social circles. "My sisters all married well and settled into the lives expected of them," she explained. "But I wanted something more. I wanted to matter, to do something that made a difference. Teaching gave me that purpose. Your family must miss you terribly." "They do, and I miss them as well. But I could not be who they wanted me to be. I tried for a while. I was even engaged once to a man my parents adored." Rosalie pushed food around her plate. "Thomas was everything they wanted for me. Wealthy, connected, respectable. But he did not see me, not really. He saw the wife he wanted me to become, not the woman I actually was." Jackson set down his fork. "What happened?" "I broke the engagement 3 months before the wedding. My mother did not speak to me for weeks. My father was disappointed. My sisters were horrified, but I could not marry someone who wanted to reshape me into something I was not." She met Jackson's eyes. "Coming west was partially running away from that disaster, I suppose. A chance to start fresh where no one knew about my failed engagement or my family's expectations." "That was not running away," Jackson said firmly. "That was running toward something better. You knew what you wanted, and you had the courage to pursue it, even when it meant disappointing the people you love. That takes strength." Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had ever framed her decision that way before. Everyone, even her kindest sister, had treated her choice as a tragic mistake, a moment of foolish rebellion she would eventually regret. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. "I only speak the truth." Jackson reached across the table and very gently covered her hand with his. The touch sent electricity through her, warm and startling. "You are remarkable, Rosalie Miller. This Thomas was a fool to lose you." She turned her hand over, letting their palms meet. His skin was rough and warm, his grip gentle but strong. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, something profound and unspoken passing between them. "Jackson," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. I am glad you came to the tent that day. So am I." His thumb traced a small circle on her palm, a caress so gentle she might have imagined it. "So am I." Work on the schoolhouse began the following Monday with remarkable speed. Jackson arrived at the site just after dawn with 3 other men from the Double R Ranch and a wagon full of tools and timber. Rosalie had dismissed classes for the day so the children could watch the groundbreaking, and they stood in an excited cluster as Jackson and his crew began measuring and marking the foundation. "Miss Miller, are we really getting a real school?" little Sarah asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "We are, sweetheart, thanks to Mr. Richardson's generosity and Mr. Yates's hard work." Rosalie watched Jackson work, fascinated by the competence he displayed. He moved with purpose and precision, directing the other men, checking measurements, making adjustments to his plans. The morning sun caught in his dark hair and highlighted the strong lines of his profile. When he looked up and caught her watching, he smiled, and she felt her heart do a small flip in her chest. "This is dangerous," a small voice in her head warned. "You barely know this man. You have been hurt before. Be careful." But her heart was not interested in being careful. Her heart wanted to move closer, to watch Jackson work, to be near him. So she sent the children home with assignments and stayed at the building site, ostensibly to answer questions about the design, but really just to be present. Jackson did not seem to mind. During breaks, he sought her out, bringing her water from the creek, pointing out progress on the foundation, asking her opinion on small details. The other men noticed, exchanging knowing glances, but Rosalie found she did not care. Let them talk. She was falling for Jackson Yates, and she was tired of fighting it. By the end of the first week, the foundation was complete and the framing had begun. Rosalie held class in the tent, but spent every moment of free time at the construction site. She brought Jackson lunch, and they ate together sitting on lumber piles, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved poetry, that his favorite color was the particular shade of gold the prairie turned at sunset, that he had once wanted to be a teacher like his father, but had been too restless to stay in one place. "I like working with my hands," he explained, flexing his fingers. They were scraped and calloused from the construction work, but Rosalie thought they were beautiful. "I like seeing something take shape, something real and solid that will last. Teaching is important, vital even, but it was not my calling. Building things, creating shelter and safety for people, that feels right to me." "You are creating safety for the children," Rosalie pointed out. "This schoolhouse will shelter them, protect them while they learn. That is a kind of teaching too, just in a different form." Jackson looked at her with such warmth that her breath caught. "I had not thought of it that way, but you are right. We are partners in this, you and I. You will teach their minds, and I will provide the space for that teaching to happen. Partners." The word resonated in Rosalie's chest. She liked the sound of it, the implication of shared purpose and mutual support. With Thomas, she had always felt like an accessory to his life, something pretty to display at parties. With Jackson, she felt like an equal, someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. 3 weeks into construction, disaster struck. A late September storm rolled across the prairie with terrifying speed, bringing wind and rain and even some hail. Rosalie huddled in the boarding house, watching through the window as the storm battered the town. Her first thought was for the schoolhouse, weeks of work potentially destroyed in one afternoon. When the storm finally cleared, she threw on her cloak and ran through the muddy streets to the construction site. Her heart sank when she saw the damage. The partially completed roof had been torn away, lumber scattered across the ground. One wall had collapsed. The beautiful windows that had been installed just days before were shattered, glass glittering in the mud. Jackson was already there, standing in the wreckage with his hat in his hands and his shoulders slumped in defeat. When he saw Rosalie approaching, he straightened, trying to hide his despair. "It is bad," he said simply. "Weeks of work lost." Rosalie picked her way through the debris, her practical boots sinking in the mud. She reached Jackson's side and slipped her hand into his. "Then we rebuild. We start again. The windows alone will cost a fortune to replace. Mr. Richardson has already been so generous. I cannot ask him for more money to fix damage from a storm. So we find another way. We hold a fundraiser. We ask the townspeople to contribute. This is their school too, their children who will benefit. They should be part of building it." Jackson looked down at her and something in his expression shifted. "You are incredible. Most people would be devastated right now, ready to give up. But you are already planning how to move forward." "I learned not to give up when I spent 3 weeks teaching in a tent," Rosalie said firmly. "A storm is not going to stop me now. Is it going to stop you?" "No." His hand tightened on hers. "No, it is not." They organized a town meeting for that Saturday. Rosalie expected a small turnout, but to her surprise, the hotel meeting room was packed. Parents of her students came, but also merchants, ranchers, even some of the soldiers from the fort. Jackson stood at the front of the room and explained the situation clearly and honestly. The school had suffered storm damage. They needed funds to replace materials and continue construction. He asked for donations, no matter how small. The response overwhelmed them both. Mrs. Peterson pledged $10, a substantial sum for a widow. The owner of the general store offered to donate nails and other hardware. A local rancher said he could provide additional lumber. Parents pledged what they could afford, even if it was only $1 or $2. By the end of the meeting, they had raised enough not only to repair the storm damage, but to add some of the extras Rosalie had thought they could not afford, like a small library room and a proper teacher's desk. "You should say something," Jackson urged Rosalie as the meeting was winding down. "These people are doing this for you as much as for the children." Rosalie stood up, her legs shaking slightly. She was not accustomed to public speaking, but the kindness of these rough frontier people had moved her deeply. "I want to thank you all," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "When I came to Fort Laramie, I expected to find a rough place, and I did. But I also found something I did not expect, a community that cares deeply about its children and their futures. You have shown me that the frontier is not just about survival. It is about building something better, something lasting. This schoolhouse will stand as a testament to your generosity and your commitment to education. I promise you, I will teach your children to the very best of my ability, and I will never forget what you have done here tonight." The room erupted in applause, and Rosalie sat down quickly, her cheeks burning. Jackson leaned close and whispered, "That was perfect. You were perfect." The warmth in his voice made her glow inside. Reconstruction began immediately, and this time, the whole town seemed invested in the project. Men volunteered their time on weekends to help with the building. Women brought food for the workers. Children hauled water and ran errands. The schoolhouse became a true community effort, and the work went faster than before. Rosalie and Jackson spent long hours together at the site, their friendship deepening into something more with each passing day. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own ranch, a place where he could build things and raise horses, and perhaps, eventually, a family. She shared her own hopes for the school, how she wanted to create not just a place of learning but a true center of culture for the community, with evening programs for adults and a lending library and maybe even musical performances. "You think big," Jackson said admiringly. "I like that about you." My mother always said I had unrealistic expectations, Rosalie replied. She wanted me to be content with a small, safe life. There is nothing wrong with wanting more, with reaching for something bigger. Jackson set down the hammer he had been using and turned to face her fully. Rosalie, I need to tell you something. The serious tone of his voice made her pulse quicken. What is it? I am falling in love with you. The words came out in a rush, as though he had been holding them back for a long time. I know we have not known each other long, just 6 weeks, but I have never felt this way about anyone before. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful, and every day I spend with you makes me more certain that you are the woman I have been waiting for my whole life. Rosalie's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over the sound of her own blood rushing. Jackson, you do not have to say anything right now, he interrupted. I know this is sudden. I just needed you to know how I feel. I cannot keep pretending this is just about building a schoolhouse. For me, it stopped being about the schoolhouse weeks ago. It has been about you, about us, about building something together that could last beyond these walls. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. It is not sudden, she whispered. I have been falling for you too. Every day, every conversation, every moment we spend together. You see me, Jackson. You see who I really am, not who you want me to be. That is all I have ever wanted. He covered her hand with his, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. I see you, Rosalie. I see a woman who is strong enough to cross a continent for what she believes in, brave enough to teach in a tent through Wyoming wind and weather, stubborn enough to refuse to give up even when storms destroy weeks of work. I see someone extraordinary. Kiss me, she said, the words escaping before she could think better of them. Please, Jackson, kiss me. He did not need to be asked twice. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened quickly into something more passionate. Rosalie had been kissed before, chased pecks from Thomas that had left her unmoved. But this was different. This was fire and heat and a feeling of coming home all at once. She kissed Jackson back with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks, her hands sliding into his hair, her body pressing close to his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Rosalie Miller. I want to build a life with you, not just a schoolhouse. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to support your dreams and share your adventures and be your partner in every way that matters. I love you too, she said, tears streaming down her face. I came west looking for adventure, but I found something so much better. I found you. They kissed again, longer this time, until the sound of approaching voices forced them to step apart. The other workers were returning from their lunch break, and propriety demanded some discretion. But Jackson kept hold of Rosalie's hand, and she did not pull away. Let people see that they were together. She was not ashamed of loving him. She was proud. The schoolhouse was completed in mid-November, just as the first real winter snows began to fall. The building was everything Rosalie had dreamed of and more. The main classroom was spacious and bright, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light. A beautiful stove sat in the center, already radiating heat. Real desks stood in neat rows, each one built by Jackson himself during the evenings after his ranch work was done. There was a proper blackboard on the front wall, shelves for books, and even a small bell tower that Jackson had added as a surprise. For calling the children to class, he explained when he showed it to her. Every real school needs a bell. The community held a dedication ceremony on a crisp Saturday morning. The entire town turned out, along with ranchers from the surrounding area. Walter Richardson gave a speech about the importance of education. The town mayor, sheepish about the school board's earlier failures, praised the community effort that had built the schoolhouse. And then everyone turned to Rosalie, expecting her to speak. She stood at the front of the new classroom, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 3 months ago, I arrived in Fort Laramie to teach school in a tent, she began. I will not lie to you. Those first weeks were difficult. I was discouraged and frustrated, and I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake coming west. But then Jackson Yates walked into that tent and saw not what was, but what could be. He saw these children deserved better, and he made it his mission to provide it. This schoolhouse stands because of his vision and his determination and his generous heart. She looked at Jackson, who stood at the back of the room, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such love that it took her breath away. But it also stands because of all of you, Rosalie continued. Because when the storm damaged our work, you rallied to help. Because you gave your time and your money and your effort to build something that would benefit the entire community. This is not just my schoolhouse, or Mr. Richardson's schoolhouse, or even the children's schoolhouse. This is our schoolhouse, built by all of us together. And I promise you, I will honor that gift by being the best teacher I can possibly be. The room erupted in applause, and then the children were running forward, eager to explore every corner of their new school. Rosalie showed them the library room, already stocked with books donated by families in town. She demonstrated the bell, letting each child take a turn ringing it. She opened the stove and showed them how it worked, how it would keep them warm even in the depths of winter. Jackson watched it all from the doorway, his expression content. When the crowd finally began to thin, he approached Rosalie and extended his hand. "Walk with me," he asked. They strolled away from the schoolhouse, past the edge of town to where the prairie stretched out in endless waves of brown grass dusted with snow. The afternoon sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Jackson led her to a small rise that overlooked the town. Fort Laramie spread out below them like a child's toy village. "You see that?" Jackson pointed to the schoolhouse, its white walls gleaming in the late light. "That is what we built together, something real and solid and good. Something that will be here long after we are gone, teaching children we will never meet." "It is beautiful," Rosalie agreed. "I still can hardly believe it is real." Jackson turned to face her, and she saw that his hands were shaking slightly. "Rosalie, I built that schoolhouse for many reasons. For the children, yes, because education matters and they deserved better than a tent. But also for you, because I could not stand to see you struggling in those conditions. And for us, because I needed to prove to you and to myself that I am a man who can build things that last. That I can provide for a family. That I can be the kind of husband you deserve." Rosalie's breath caught as Jackson dropped to one knee in the snow-dusted grass. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light and sparkled. "Rosalie Miller, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have a courage that humbles me and a heart that inspires me to be better than I am. I love you more than I have words to express, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love to you every single day. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner, your protector, your greatest supporter in all the dreams you chase? Will you build a life with me here in Wyoming, teaching our community's children and maybe, someday, teaching our own?" Tears were streaming down Rosalie's face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you. I will build a life with you. I will be your partner and your wife, and I will love you for as long as I live." Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was standing, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made the world spin. Rosalie kissed him back, pouring all her love and joy and hope for their future into that moment. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, she looked down at the ring on her finger and felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. "When did you get this?" she asked, admiring how the diamond caught the light. "2 weeks ago. I have been carrying it around, waiting for the perfect moment. I wanted the schoolhouse to be finished first, wanted to be able to show you what we had accomplished together before I asked you to take on an even bigger project, building a life with me. You are romantic, Jackson Yates." I had not expected that from a rough cowboy. "Then you do not know cowboys very well," he teased. "We are a sentimental bunch, we just hide it well." He kissed her again, softer this time. "When shall we marry? I do not want to wait long. I have waited my whole life to find you, Rosalie. I do not want to waste another day." "What about a Christmas wedding?" Rosalie suggested. "That gives us 6 weeks to plan something simple. We could have the ceremony in the schoolhouse, surrounded by the community that helped build it. A Christmas wedding in the schoolhouse we built together." "That is perfect. You are perfect." Jackson pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. News of their engagement spread through Fort Laramie with the speed of wildfire. Mrs. Peterson wept happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding breakfast. The mothers of Rosalie's students offered to sew her a wedding dress. Walter Richardson, delighted that his favorite ranch hand was marrying the teacher, gave Jackson a bonus and 3 days off for a honeymoon. The town, which had rallied to build the schoolhouse, now rallied to create a wedding. Rosalie threw herself into teaching with renewed joy, her heart full to overflowing. The children loved their new schoolhouse and took pride in keeping it clean and orderly. The stove worked beautifully, keeping the classroom warm even as November gave way to December, and the snow piled deeper outside. She started a lending library program, staying late twice a week so adults could come check out books. She organized a Christmas program, with the children preparing songs and recitations to perform for their families. Jackson continued working at the Double R Ranch, but he spent every free moment with Rosalie. They took long walks in the snow, planning their future. He told her about a piece of land he had his eye on, 40 acres just north of town with a creek running through it. "It would make a perfect spot for a small ranch," he said. "Close enough to Fort Laramie that Rosalie could continue teaching, but far enough out to have the space and freedom he craved. "I have been saving my wages for years," he explained. "If I can convince the owner to sell, I will have enough for a down payment. We could build a house, start small with just a few horses, grow slowly. I would still need to work for Mr. Richardson part-time at first, but eventually it could become our whole livelihood. What do you think?" "I think it sounds wonderful," Rosalie said honestly. "I love teaching, but I also love the idea of having a home that is truly ours, built by your hands. Maybe with a big garden and chickens and all the things I never had in Boston. We will have all of that and more. I promise you, Rosalie, I will give you everything you deserve." She took his face in her hands and kissed him tenderly. "You already have. You saw me when no one else did. You supported my work when others dismissed it. You built a schoolhouse because you believed in the importance of what I do. That is worth more than any amount of land or money or possessions. You have given me yourself, Jackson, and that is the greatest gift I could ever receive." As Christmas approached, Fort Laramie transformed into something magical. Evergreen boughs decorated the storefronts. Candles glowed in windows. The smell of baking filled the air as families prepared for the holiday. And in the schoolhouse, Rosalie's students practiced their Christmas program with dedicated enthusiasm. 3 days before the wedding, Rosalie's mother arrived on the stagecoach, having made the long journey from Boston despite her initial horror at her daughter's engagement to a cowboy. Margaret Miller was a small, elegant woman who looked utterly out of place in Fort Laramie with her fine traveling suit and impractical shoes. But when she saw how happy Rosalie was, how the entire town treated her daughter with respect and affection, something in her softened. "You are glowing," Margaret said that first evening as they sat together in the boarding house. "I have never seen you look like this, not even when you were engaged to Thomas. Because I never loved Thomas, not really, not the way I love Jackson." Rosalie took her mother's hand. "I know he is not what you wanted for me. He is not wealthy or connected or from a good family. But he is good, Mama. He is the best man I have ever known, and he loves me exactly as I am. Is that not worth more than all the fancy connections in the world?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I only wanted you to be happy and secure. I was so afraid you would come out here and be miserable. I am happier than I have ever been. And as for security, Jackson is building us a home with his own hands. We will have enough to live on, and we will have each other. That is all the security I need." "Then I give you my blessing," Margaret said, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. "If this is what you want, truly want, then I am happy for you." Jackson met Rosalie's mother the next day, and Rosalie could see him trying to hide his nervousness as Margaret looked him over with a critical eye. But Jackson was himself, honest and straightforward, and gradually Margaret warmed to him. When he spoke about his plans for the ranch, about his commitment to supporting Rosalie's teaching career, about how much he loved her daughter, Margaret finally smiled. "You will take care of her?" she asked. "With my life," Jackson replied without hesitation. "She is everything to me, Mrs. Miller. I will spend every day making sure she knows that. Then you have my blessing. Welcome to our family, Jackson." The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, in the schoolhouse decorated with evergreen boughs and candles. The entire town crowded inside, bundled in their winter best. Rosalie wore a simple white dress that the mothers of her students had sewn, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her mother had brought her grandmother's veil from Boston, and it cascaded down her back in delicate folds. Jackson stood at the front of the classroom in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on Rosalie as she walked down the makeshift aisle on her mother's arm. She had no father to give her away. He had died 3 years earlier, so Margaret walked her daughter to Jackson and placed Rosalie's hand in his. "Take care of my girl," Margaret whispered. "Always," Jackson promised. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher who passed through Fort Laramie once a month. He spoke of love and commitment, of building a life together on the foundation of mutual respect and support. When he asked for the vows, Jackson spoke first. "Rosalie, I vow to love you in every season, through hardship and blessing, through doubt and certainty. I vow to support your dreams even when they scare me, to believe in you even when you doubt yourself. I vow to build you a home worthy of the amazing woman you are, and to fill that home with laughter and love and maybe, if we are blessed with children. I vow to be your partner in all things, to stand beside you as an equal, never trying to change you or diminish you. You are my heart, Rosalie, and I will treasure that gift for all the days of my life." Rosalie had to wipe away tears before she could speak her own vows. "Jackson, I vow to love you with everything I am. You saw me when I felt invisible, valued me when I felt worthless, gave me courage when I was afraid. I vow to be your partner in building the life we dream of, to work beside you, to support you in all your endeavors. I vow to fill our home with warmth and joy, to be a safe harbor for you always." You are my adventure, Jackson, the greatest one I could ever have asked for, and I promise to cherish every moment we have together." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed Rosalie with such tender passion that several of the ladies in attendance sighed audibly. Then the children broke into their Christmas song, and the whole town joined in, their voices filling the schoolhouse with joy. The wedding breakfast was held at the hotel, with food provided by half the women in Fort Laramie. There was roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread, dried apple pie, and even a small wedding cake that Mrs. Peterson had somehow managed to create despite the limited ingredients available on the frontier. Speeches were made, toasts were drunk, and through it all, Rosalie and Jackson sat hand in hand, barely able to take their eyes off each other long enough to eat. Walter Richardson stood to speak, raising his glass. "I hired Jackson Yates 5 years ago because he was a good cowhand and an honest man. But over the years, I have come to see him as more than an employee. He is like a son to me, and I could not be happier to see him marry such a fine woman. Rosalie, you have brought learning and culture to our rough town, and you have brought joy to a man who deserved it more than anyone I know. May you both be blessed with long life, prosperity, and many years of happiness together." The party continued late into the night, but eventually, Jackson and Rosalie slipped away, walking through the quiet, snowy streets to the small house that Jackson had been secretly preparing for weeks. It was not much yet, just 3 rooms in a building near the schoolhouse, but he had made it as comfortable as he could. A fire crackled in the hearth. Candles glowed on the mantel. Clean sheets covered the bed, and wildflowers that must have cost a fortune in December sat in a vase on the table. "It is not much," Jackson said, suddenly shy. "Not compared to what you grew up with in Boston. But it is ours, and I promise you, Rosalie, I will build you something better. A real house on our own land with everything you could want." Rosalie turned to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "This is perfect. You are perfect. I do not need a mansion or fancy things, Jackson. I just need you." He kissed her then, and all the passion they had been holding back during their courtship finally found release. They came together as husband and wife, their love expressed in touches and whispers and the profound intimacy of 2 souls becoming one. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the firelight, talking softly about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Rosalie said, running her fingers through Jackson's hair. "At least 3 or 4, enough to fill a house with noise and laughter. I want that too. I want to teach them to ride and to read, to be brave and kind. I want them to have the childhood I had before the fever took my parents, full of love and security and possibility." Jackson kissed her forehead. "Do you think you will keep teaching after we have children?" "I would like to, at least part-time. Maybe when they are young I could teach from home, and then return to the schoolhouse when they are old enough. Or perhaps we could arrange for someone to watch them during school hours. I do not want to give up teaching entirely, but I also do not want to miss their childhoods." "We will figure it out together," Jackson promised. "Whatever allows you to pursue both dreams, being a mother and being a teacher, you should not have to choose." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the fire burning low, snow falling softly outside their window, content in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Rosalie woke to find Jackson already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He brought her a cup in bed, kissing her thoroughly before settling beside her. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Yates," he said, and the sound of her new name made her smile. "Merry Christmas, my love." They spent a quiet morning together, just the 2 of them, before joining Mrs. Peterson and Rosalie's mother for Christmas dinner. Margaret was returning to Boston after New Year's, satisfied that her daughter was well and truly happy. Over roast goose and all the trimmings, she told stories of Rosalie's childhood, embarrassing her daughter but making Jackson laugh. She was always the stubborn one, Margaret said fondly. Once she made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. I used to think it was a flaw, but now I see it was strength. She knew her own mind, even as a child. I am grateful for that stubbornness, Jackson said, reaching for Rosalie's hand under the table. If she had not been strong enough to come west, I never would have met her. God works in mysterious ways, Mrs. Peterson added. Who would have thought that a broken-down school board and a tent classroom would lead to such a beautiful love story? After dinner, Jackson pulled Rosalie aside. I have something to show you. Bundle up warm. It is a bit of a ride. They rode out on horseback, Jackson on his sturdy gelding and Rosalie on a gentle mare he had borrowed from the Double R. The winter landscape was breathtaking, all white snow and blue sky and the dark green of scattered pines. After about 30 minutes, they came to a piece of land Rosalie had never seen before, a lovely spot with a creek running through it and cottonwood trees lining the banks. This is it, Jackson said, dismounting and helping Rosalie down. The 40 acres I told you about. I spoke to the owner last week, and he agreed to sell. We will sign the papers in January, and then this land will be ours. This is where we will build our ranch, our home, our future. Rosalie looked around, imagining it all, a house on that rise with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. A barn near the creek for horses and cattle. A garden, a chicken coop, maybe someday a orchard, and children running through it all, their laughter echoing across the prairie. It is perfect, she breathed. Oh, Jackson, it is absolutely perfect. I am going to build you the finest house in Wyoming, he promised. It will take time. I will have to work and save and build slowly. But I want you to have a home you can be proud of, a place where you feel safe and loved always. I already feel safe and loved because I am with you. The house is just a building, Jackson. You are my home. They stood together on their future land, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, and made plans. Where the rooms would be, how large the barn should be, whether to plant apple trees or cherry. It was all hypothetical, dreams that would take years to realize, but speaking them aloud made them feel real, attainable. That night, back in their small rented house, Jackson pulled out a notebook and began sketching house plans while Rosalie read aloud from a book of poetry. It was a peaceful, domestic scene, and Rosalie felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what happiness looked like, she realized. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but quiet evenings with the person you love, planning a future together. The winter months passed in a blur of teaching, planning, and settling into married life. Rosalie discovered that being a wife was very different from what she had imagined during her engagement to Thomas. Jackson treated her as a true partner, consulting her on decisions, valuing her opinions, supporting her work. When she wanted to start an evening reading program for adults who had never learned, he helped her organize it and even attended himself, sitting in the back of the schoolhouse with ranchers and soldiers and shopkeepers, all struggling to learn their letters. In March, Jackson began work on their house, spending every spare moment clearing the land and laying the foundation. True to his word, he built slowly but well, refusing to rush or cut corners. Rosalie often rode out after school to watch him work, bringing dinner they would eat sitting on lumber piles, talking about their day. Tommy Anderson is finally mastering multiplication, she reported one evening in April. He was so proud when he solved a problem on his own. And Sarah Jenkins has been reading to the younger children during recess. I think she might become a teacher herself someday. "You are making a real difference," Jackson said, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Those children will carry what you teach them for the rest of their lives." "I hope so. I want them to see that education is not just about memorizing facts. It is about learning to think, to question, to understand the world around them." By summer, the frame of their house was complete, and by fall, the roof was on and the windows installed. It was a simple structure, 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well built, and every nail in it had been driven by Jackson's own hands. They moved in just before winter, bringing their few possessions from the rented house in town. Rosalie stood in the middle of their new parlor, looking around at the bare walls and empty rooms, and felt tears of joy in her eyes. "We have a home, a real home." Jackson wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We do. And I have news that will make it even better. Mr. Richardson has given me a loan to buy my first breeding horses. If all goes well, we could have our ranch operation running by spring." They celebrated that night with a special dinner, and afterwards, making love in their own bed in their own house on their own land, Rosalie felt that her life had exceeded even her wildest dreams. In December, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant. She told Jackson on Christmas Eve, presenting the news as her gift to him. He was speechless at first, then laughed and cried at the same time, picking her up and spinning her around despite her protests that he needed to be careful. "I am going to be a father," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born in late August of 1880, arriving during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of their ranch house. Rosalie labored through the afternoon with Mrs. Peterson and her mother, who had returned for the birth, attending her. Jackson paced the porch, unable to sit still, until Mrs. Peterson finally called him inside to meet his child. "A boy," she announced, placing the tiny bundle in Jackson's arms. "Healthy and strong with a good set of lungs on him." Jackson looked down at his son, and Rosalie saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. Rosalie, you did perfectly. He is perfect." They named him James, after Jackson's father, and from the moment he was born, he had his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. Jackson proved to be a devoted father, taking James with him on ranch rounds as soon as the boy could sit up, teaching him about horses and cattle and the land. Rosalie balanced motherhood and teaching, taking a year off when James was born but returning part-time when he was old enough to stay with Mrs. Peterson during school hours. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, red-haired and fierce from the start. They named her Rose after Rosalie, and she proved to be even more stubborn than her mother. Then came another son, Thomas, gentle and bookish, who preferred reading to riding. And finally, when Rosalie was 31, twin girls, Emma and Grace, who kept the entire household in chaos with their mischief and energy. Through it all, the ranch prospered. Jackson's breeding program was successful, and their horses became known throughout Wyoming for their quality and temperament. They hired hands to help with the work, and Jackson built additional barns and corrals. Rosalie continued teaching, though by the time the twins were born, she taught only 3 days a week, spending the other days managing the household and helping with the ranch accounts. The schoolhouse remained the center of Fort Laramie's community, a testament to what people could accomplish when they worked together. Over the years, other buildings were constructed, a proper church, a new town hall, but the schoolhouse held a special place in everyone's hearts because it had been built with their own hands, their own money, their own sweat and determination. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson and Rosalie stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. James, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Thomas to rope a fence post. 7-year-old Rose was reading a book in the shade of a cottonwood tree, oblivious to the chaos around her. The twins, just turned 3, were chasing chickens and shrieking with laughter. "We built a good life," Jackson said, his arm around Rosalie's waist. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We did," Rosalie agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I think about that day you walked into my tent classroom, how angry you were about the conditions. I had no idea that moment would change my entire life. I fell in love with you that day, you know. I did not realize it then, but looking back, I think I knew from the moment I saw you trying to teach in that terrible tent that you were someone special, someone worth building something for. You built me a schoolhouse and proposed," Rosalie said softly. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed. A home, a family, a partnership. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined when I left Boston. You gave me just as much: purpose, love, a family of my own, a reason to build instead of just drift from place to place." Jackson turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I love you, Rosalie Yates, more today than the day I married you, more tomorrow than today. You are my heart, my home, my everything." She reached up and kissed him, a kiss that held 10 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they broke apart, Rose called from under her tree, "Papa, Mama, are you kissing again?" "That is disgusting," they laughed, and Jackson called back, "You will understand when you are older, sweetheart. Someday you will find someone who makes you want to kiss them even after 10 years of marriage." "Never," Rose declared dramatically, but Rosalie smiled, knowing her fierce daughter would someday discover love just as her parents had. That evening, after the children were finally in bed, Jackson presented Rosalie with an anniversary gift. It was a wooden box, beautifully crafted from cherry wood, with their initials carved on the lid. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a collection of items from their courtship and marriage. The original sketch he had made of the schoolhouse plans, a dried wildflower from their wedding bouquet, the first letter she had written him when her mother took ill and she had to spend a month in Boston, a small stone from the foundation of their house, and at the bottom, a new item, a deed. "What is this?" Rosalie asked, unfolding the paper. "The schoolhouse. I bought it from the town. It was going to be torn down. They want to build something bigger, more modern. But I could not let that happen, not to the building where we fell in love, where we were married. So I bought it. I thought we could maintain it as a community center, or perhaps someday turn it into a library like you always dreamed of. Whatever you want to do with it, it is ours now. No one can tear down what we built together." Rosalie stared at the deed, tears streaming down her face. "You bought the schoolhouse. I could not let it be destroyed. It means too much. It is where our story truly began." She set down the deed and threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "I love you so much. How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I am the lucky one," Jackson insisted. "Every single day. I am grateful that you answered that advertisement and came to Fort Laramie. Grateful that you were stubborn enough to teach in a tent. Grateful that I had the courage to walk in that day and see what needed to be done. Everything good in my life started with you, Rosalie." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, but also the passion that had never faded between them. And afterwards, lying in each other's arms, they talked about the future, about the children growing up and having children of their own, about the ranch continuing to prosper, about the old schoolhouse becoming a library and community center, about growing old together on this land they loved, surrounded by the family they had created. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. James grew into a fine young man who shared his father's love of horses and took over more and more of the ranch operations. Rose went east to college. shocking the family but making them proud, and returned with a teaching degree to take over the Fort Laramie School when Rosalie finally retired. Thomas became a lawyer, practicing in Cheyenne but visiting the ranch often. Emma married a neighboring rancher and settled nearby. Grace moved to Denver but came home every summer with her growing family. Jackson and Rosalie aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 25th wedding anniversary, they threw a huge party at the ranch, inviting everyone from Fort Laramie and the surrounding area. The old schoolhouse had been converted into a library and community center, just as Rosalie had dreamed, and she spent her retirement years managing it, organizing reading programs and cultural events. At the party, their children and grandchildren gathered around, insisting that Jackson and Rosalie tell the story of how they met. It had become a family legend, the tale of the teacher in the tent and the cowboy who built her a schoolhouse. "I was so discouraged," Rosalie began, her voice still strong even at 48. "Teaching in that terrible tent, wondering if I had made a mistake coming west. And then this tall, angry cowboy walked in and looked around like he wanted to fight someone." "I was angry," Jackson admitted, his hair now more gray than dark but his eyes still that striking blue-green. "Angry that a woman as fine as your grandmother was being treated so poorly. Angry that children were expected to learn in such conditions. So I decided to do something about it." "He built us a schoolhouse," Rosalie continued, looking at Jackson with all the love of 25 years in her eyes. "The most beautiful schoolhouse Wyoming had ever seen. And then, when it was finished, he proposed to me right there on the prairie, with the building we created together standing behind us." "Best decision I ever made," Jackson said, taking her hand. "Marrying your grandmother gave me everything, a purpose, a family, a home. I was just a drifting cowboy before she came along. She made me want to build something permanent, something lasting." "We built it together," Rosalie corrected gently. "Everything we have, we created as partners. That is what I want all of you to remember. Find someone who sees you as an equal, who supports your dreams, who builds with you instead of for you. That is the secret to a happy marriage." Their granddaughter, 8-year-old Margaret, tugged on Rosalie's skirt. "Grandmother, do you still love grandfather as much as you did when you married him?" Rosalie smiled and looked at Jackson, seeing not the weathered rancher of nearly 50 but the young cowboy who had walked into her tent classroom with determination in his eyes and hope in his heart. "More," she said simply. "I love him more every single day." The party continued late into the night with music and dancing and stories. But eventually, Jackson and Rosalie slipped away, walking hand in hand to their favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise overlooking the valley where their house stood, surrounded by the barns and corrals and pastures they had built together. 25 years, Jackson mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. "Both," Rosalie said, leaning against his shoulder. "It feels like both, and that is exactly right." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the Wyoming prairie. The same stars that had shone on the night Jackson proposed, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding, the births of their children, all the joys and sorrows and ordinary moments that made up a life well lived. "You have any regrets?" Jackson asked. "Leaving Boston, marrying a cowboy, spending your life on a frontier ranch?" "Not a single one," Rosalie replied without hesitation. "This life with you has been the greatest adventure I could have asked for. You gave me everything I needed, Jackson. Love, partnership, children, purpose. What more could anyone want?" "Nothing," he agreed. "Absolutely nothing." As they walked back to the house, Arms around each other, Rosalie thought about the young woman she had been, fresh off the stagecoach from Boston with her romantic notions of frontier adventure. She had found adventure, but more importantly, she had found love. She had found a man who saw her, valued her, built her a schoolhouse, and proposed not just marriage but true partnership. And from that foundation, they had built a life that was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. The years continued to be kind to them. Jackson remained vigorous into his 60s, still riding the ranch daily, still building things with his capable hands. Rosalie continued managing the library, her mind sharp and her passion for education undiminished. They became the beloved patriarch and matriarch of Fort Laramie, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of what love could build. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out to celebrate. The party was held in the old schoolhouse, now officially named the Yates Community Library and Cultural Center in their honor. Their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the building, along with former students, ranch hands, and friends from 5 decades of life in Wyoming. The governor sent a proclamation honoring their contributions to education and ranching in the state. The mayor gave a speech about how the schoolhouse had been the catalyst for Fort Laramie's growth into a proper town. But the most touching moment came when Rose, now the head teacher at the new, larger school, presented her parents with a book. "We have been collecting stories," she explained, "from everyone whose lives you touched over the years. Students you taught, cowboys you worked with, friends you helped, family you loved. We wanted you to know how much you have meant to all of us." Jackson and Rosalie sat together, reading story after story of lives they had influenced. The boy who learned to read and became a journalist. The girl who gained confidence in Rosalie's classroom and went on to become a doctor. The young rancher Jackson mentored who now ran one of the largest operations in Wyoming. Page after page of gratitude and love. "We did good," Jackson whispered to Rosalie, tears in his eyes. "We built something that mattered." "We did," she agreed, her own voice choked with emotion. "We built a life of love and service and purpose. What more could we ask for?" That night, alone in their ranch house with the party finally over, they sat on the porch swing Jackson had built 30 years earlier. The night was clear and warm, a perfect June evening, and they rocked gently, hands clasped, hearts full. "You remember what I said to you the day I proposed?" Jackson asked. "Every word. You said I was the most remarkable woman you had ever known, that you loved me more than you had words to express, that you wanted to spend the rest of your life proving that love to me. And have I proven it, I mean?" Rosalie turned to look at her husband, this man who had built her a schoolhouse and proposed, who had given her 50 years of unwavering love and support, who had made her dreams possible while pursuing his own. "Every single day," she said softly. "You have proven it every single day, Jackson Yates, and I hope I have done the same for you." "More than I ever deserved," he replied. "You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams, Rosalie. You took a lonely cowboy and made him a husband, a father, a grandfather. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to wake up every morning. I would build you 1,000 schoolhouses if I could, just to see you smile the way you smiled that first time I showed you the plans." They kissed, a gentle kiss full of 50 years of love and commitment and shared history. And as they sat together on their porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, they both felt profoundly grateful for that day so long ago when an angry cowboy had walked into a tent classroom and seen not what was, but what could be. The years grew shorter, as they do for everyone, but Jackson and Rosalie faced them together with the same partnership that had defined their marriage. When Jackson's knees finally gave out from decades of hard ranch work, Rosalie was there to help him adjust. When Rosalie's eyes began to fail, making reading difficult, Jackson read to her every evening, just as she had once read to him. They grew old together, their bodies weakening but their love remaining strong. Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Rosalie holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you, my remarkable wife. Thank you for the adventure." Rosalie grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had been blessed with 56 years of marriage to a man who had loved her completely, who had built her a schoolhouse and proposed, who had made all her dreams come true. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, managing the library, telling stories about Jackson to anyone who would listen. When she finally passed, surrounded by family, her last thoughts were of a tent classroom on the Wyoming prairie and a tall cowboy with blue-green eyes who had walked in and changed her entire life. They buried her next to Jackson on the ranch they had built together, under the cottonwood trees they had planted as newlyweds. Their story lived on in Fort Laramie, passed down through generations. The Yates Community Library and Cultural Center stood as a testament to their love and their commitment to education. The ranch continued to operate under James's management, then his children's, a lasting legacy of Jackson's hard work and vision. And in the local school, every new teacher heard the story of Rosalie Miller, who came west to teach in a tent, and Jackson Yates, who built her a schoolhouse and proposed, and how together they built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. It was a love story for the ages, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they found in each other true partnership and unwavering support. A reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that love, when built on a foundation of respect and equality, could weather any storm and last beyond death itself. The schoolhouse stood for over 100 years before it was finally, carefully dismantled and rebuilt as part of a historical museum. But the love story it represented lived on forever, inspiring couples for generations to build their own lives with the same dedication and partnership that Jackson and Rosalie had shown. They had started with a tent and a dream, and they had built an empire of love that enriched everyone it touched. And so their story ended, not with sadness but with the profound satisfaction of lives fully lived, of love fully given and received, of dreams pursued and realized together. They had built their schoolhouse, raised their family, created their legacy, and loved each other every step of the way. It was, in every sense, a life perfectly lived, and a love that would never be forgotten.